you know that there is a publishing company that wants to make life easier for you as a writer? This publishing company is called World Inkers Printing and Publishing. We publish in all different languages, and we're looking for writers of all genres, all formats. We're looking for scholars, ghostwriters, playwrights, poets, short fiction, novelists, you name it. We're looking for anybody who is interested in writing and the craft of writing to be in touch with us. You can reach us at info.worldinkers@gmail.com. With World Inkers Printing and Publishing, you do not require a lot of money to publish with us. Contact us today at info.worldinkers@gmail.com. Become a winner with other authors at World Inkers Printing and Publishing. Give us a shot. We will surely finish you.
Welcome to Foreign Policy Review today. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. I'm here with Lenny Bruce. And we have our co-hosts, Ben Toth from Hungary, and we have Billy Bob from the left coast, all snowed in, and special guest today, back from Berlin, Germany. We have Leo Zhao, and we're going to kick off with a very general topic. We're going to talk about the socio-economic principles behind capitalism. And it's fading. It's rapid collapse that we've begun to witness worldwide. And I'd like to let Leo kick us off and introduce the subject. Go ahead.
Thanks
Leo.
a lot, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you
Great
for
to
having
have
me
you
again.
Great to have you back. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's these cliches floating around, especially in contemporary geopolitical discussions, that let's just start with this cliche that hard times produce weak men. Hard times, already got it wrong. Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men. Weak men create bad times. And bad times create strong men. So let's just start from there. I mean, like many of these things, it appears very true, and it is, sure, why not? But this is a typical flattening out of the understanding of our world into a natural cycles. I mean, human cycles are not natural cycles. They are produced by specific mechanisms, which typical liberal adages like this just completely ignore. The reason why empires don't last forever, the Roman Empire, they thought would last forever. They thought would be, eternal. But the reason they don't last forever is because of systemic contradictions that play itself out and intensify until the system can no longer bear the conflict, internal and external, right? Every empire, I mean, some last longer than others, obviously. People figure out a way to make them sustainable. Like, for example, the ancient Chinese feudal monarchic system was pretty well designed. I mean, they had the mandate of heaven can be understood as a kind of metaphor for democracy, because as long as the people approve of an emperor, he has the mandate of heaven. That's what they say. And then as soon as people start rebelling and they don't have enough food, the taxes are too high, and there are wars and there's injustice in the system, he has lost the mandate of heaven. That's what Chinese historians would say, or at the time that they would say that. So the Chinese monarchies lasted a long time, several hundred, 200, 300, 400 years. I think 400 years is the average. And then we can compare the Mongol Empire. It lasted very short, 100 years or 150 years or something like that. They were very good with conquering. They were not very good at holding on to political rule. So again, let's go back to Rome. The property owners, or the aristocracy, the patricians in Rome, began to get fatter and fatter. They began to be more and more wealthy, and their imperialist system of conquering all of the areas around them and getting tribute from them became more and more aggressive and more expansionist, and cost more and more lives and more money, more and more material. And the internal contradictions between the classes, between the patrician and the laborers and different strata of society, became
and slaves. Just saying, it
untenable.
was a
And the
slave
slave,
holding.
absolutely, and the slaves, the underclass, became untenable, and it eventually caused the empire to collapse. I mean, Julius Caesar probably tried to save it. He was probably kind of a social democrat, or at least progressive leftist kind of figure, but he couldn't do it. He was assassinated by the powers of ownership, of proto bourgeoisie, I suppose we can say. And class is not something that Marx invented. He only defined it, scientifically defined it, and explained it very, very well. But of course, class between the owners, people who own for a living, and people who work for a living, the ruling class, which has always been the ownership class, understands very, very well. I mean, that's why in 1700s in the United States of America, the laws were passed that black people were actually allowed to vote in northern Virginia, no, North Carolina. In North Carolina, the biggest slave state, black people could vote by after the Revolution, after the American Revolution, if they had property. Female citizens could vote in New Jersey. Even female citizens could vote if they had property. These laws are not accidental. They are fine with identitarian whatever, as long as you have property. They understand very well that it's the property ownership that is all important. That is all important to them, to the ruling class. As long as we keep political decision-making power in the class of owners, then everything's fine. We don't care about anything else. So this comes to the Marxist understanding. Marx explicitly explained this in a scientific way, in a rigorous academic, scientific, logical, rational way that's understandable to everyone. And this cannot be allowed to the ruling class. And this is the only real threat to the power structures based on ownership of land, of slaves, of cows, of whatever, of women, right? Of property that has existed for 6,000 to 10,000 years, of which capitalism is the latest permutation. And that ownership, of course, also evolved, became more sophisticated. You can get profit from ownership. The rental relationships and things like this evolved from feudalism, became more sophisticated, but no less oppressive. It's a direct extension of these 6,000-year-old systems. And Marxism, there have been rebellions. There have been plenty of rebellions that get crushed, right? There were ancient Chinese rebellions in 2000 BC, the Taoist rebellions, which might be coined as the beginning of anarchism. But none of them were serious threats. They were all crushed. And but with Marx, that came out of the Enlightenment, that Marxism is we're the only people that really take freedom, community, and these liberalism things seriously by applying it to everyone, not only the property owning classes. But so Marxism is the enemy. Let's make this very, very clear. Geopolitically, like, the fight against Russia is about the fight against China, ultimately. I mean, a White House strategic advisor, I think, recently said, Russia is a storm that we must fight, but China is climate change. I mean, all of this, before we get into the specifics of geopolitical situation today, I just want to make the point that what animates all of this, what animates wars, what drives conflict, is class. Ultimately, it is nothing but class. It is the domination rule of the property owners that sit atop of these hierarchies of power, wanting to retain their hegemony over the entire world. And yeah, I mean, every single example in all of history is testament to this thesis. It's verifiable. I mean, as soon as the first working class political power was born into this world, the very first one, the Soviet Union in 1918, the property owning class, the ruling class of all countries, were shook. They couldn't sleep. They trembled in their boots. They had night sweats. This is the challenge of a new day, of a scientific understanding of human society. That was the gravest threat. That the only thing that they fear. That's why 2 weeks after the October Revolution, 14 countries led by the US and the UK invaded. And that's why ever since then, I mean, even before then, the war against the scientific understanding of owners and workers, of the class understanding of human society, already started. The war against that, I would locate as the split between the cohesive academic discipline called political economy until the 19th century was split into political science and economics. I mean, this happened directly when Marx was writing Capital, or a few years later, to prevent this understanding of politics being driven by economics, and vice versa. The relationship between the social contract between the ruling class and the people, that is shaped by the economic relationship between owners and workers. So yeah, ever since then, it's been a war for hearts and minds, and a war of ideas against an understanding, a real logical understanding of human society, which is not rocket science. It's it's people growing food and trading with each other, and I mean, and there's this giant elephant in the room that has been categorically ignored in Western academia, largely, and since then. I mean, since the mid 1800s, waves of education reform, since the split of the disciplines, that removed Marxist understanding. It's like biology removing Darwin. So ideology, right, is just the social contract. Is the ideology is the logic and the narrative that the ruling class uses to legitimize itself. That's all ideology is. And as long as we recognize that today, 2023, we're not ready to have a stateless world, a world without governments. Like that's just fantasy. Like you want to smoke some weed and like fantasize that that's possible. Go ahead,
Anarchists.
but yeah. If you want to live in the real world, we realize that it's not reality in our era of human development, of historical, material, social development. So as long as we have governments, we have ideology, and ideology is not bad by itself. There are ideologies that are fraudulent, like liberalism, that says freedom for the individual freedom is possible when a few own everything. That is a fraudulent ideology. It is impossible. It is a fantasy. It is opposition of reality. It's opposite of reality, of lived experience. I mean, all of these things that we hear, like you work hard, get rich. That's not fucking experience for the vast majority of people. For billions of people that live under capitalism, that is not their experience. They work very, very hard. And these contradictions within society eventually play themselves out, and that causes the collapse of empire.
On the one hand, there's that legitimating, wealth. On the other hand, is the really disturbing one about homeless people, an increasing problem in the States and everywhere else, being of bad choices. He was lazy. Nothing systemic to look at here, nothing class-based. Sorry, I just wanted to...
Yeah, absolutely. So the fraudulence of liberalism, of capitalism, liberalism is the ideology of capitalism, of the bourgeois class. It legitimizes bourgeois rule. And this ideology is coming, becoming not enough to explain what's happening in the world. That's why it's collapsing.
I just have one question, Leo. How long have you hated freedom and democracy? What is your problem with freedom and democracy? That's what I want to know, Leo.
Well, my problem with freedom and democracy and human rights is their fraudulent expression, in total fraudulent expression in liberalism, in capitalism.
My experience, I really appreciate everything you said. That was a great explanation. My experience on social media, when I invest time and energy into explaining things how you did, not nearly as well, but I try. Inevitably, the follow-up comment is, "Why do you hate freedom so much?" It's just impossible to get people to respond to actual arguments because they're so caught up in their own, indoctrinated understanding of how things work and why, that they're not even able to question certain things that they just know are true. They know that, free markets bring prosperity, communism brings misery and deprivation and mass murder. And like, why do you even want to pretend otherwise? What's wrong with you, Leo? Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, so many
Stalin was a monster who killed zillions of people, don't you know? I get that all the time.
Yeah, there are so many layers of bullshit, but we have to trust in people's ultimate capacity for reason and for processing information. That's the only thing we have. So, I mean, socialism is a rational ideology because we can see its effects. As soon as this massive dose of vitamins and medicine that is socialism was introduced into the world body system, all of the illnesses of feudalism, of capitalist oppression began to subside, right? 12-year-old children could no longer be employed in mines under horrendous conditions. As soon as the Soviet Union was born in 1918, workers all over the entire world, in the Western world, in Europe and in North America, got rights, became powerful. Workers' unions became powerful as soon as the first worker state was born in the world. And feminism, Western feminism, got a giant push, a strong push towards emancipation. Civil rights was massively supported by the Soviet Union, by China. The Black Panthers were Maoists, and they visited China, and it's just like a wave of health, of justice spread across the entire globe as soon as socialism was born, because it's based on a scientific understanding of human society. Who owns, who works, who produces the value, who gets rich. I mean, it's actually pretty simple. It's not complicated. Like the people who do the work, should have control of work rather than the people who own, and they should get rich. They are the ones who should get rich, who should work less hours and not have money concentrated in fewer and fewer people, which is the only thing that capitalism can produce, is greater concentrations of wealth. I mean, this is just reality. Just open your eyes and look at reality, right?
But in all three of you have suggested one of the keys, and I'd like to get all of your opinions on this, and that is when we come to a socioeconomic subject, we're talking about educating people, and all three of you have hinted about the poor quality of the poor educability of the general population. Certainly in America, I'm always, when Ben asks me a question, my answer is because Americans are stupid, and I'm not being flip. They're stupid, and Billy Bob in his what he just expressed confirmed that to a certain degree. So how do you educate? This is a socio and economic question. How do you educate people?
I think we have to speak to people from their real experience today. We don't have to go to Habermas and Kant and Hegel and any of that stuff. I mean, we talk to people about how much money they make, who's getting rich from their work. We go from there, from everyone's lived experience. I mean, and what the reality today is that people's lived experience is in direct contradiction to the ideology that pretends that it is not an ideology, which is, it's so normalized capitalism.
I will echo CARLO's sentiment, because it is difficult in Hungary, not, in last place because of our history. We actually had socialism. A lot of people have fond memories of it, but there's 30 years of counter-education. Everything back then was evil. You were repressed. You were forced to march. That is the story told to people for 30 years. And if I bring up just basic class, what's your relation to the production and salaries if you're a car mechanic? I have these chats all the time. Like, they immediately go there. We've tried that. It failed. It's ingrained in them. And it really is difficult to get through if you use the word socialism or communism or anything like that. I'm wondering how different it is in Germany, West and East probably being different, and the American experience by Billy Bob. So I'm keen. It is difficult.
Largely, they're very similar in Germany, of course. I mean, people, yeah.
Well, if you go back to the Roman Empire, during the Roman Empire, the wealthy, they not only organized their own games and they paid for them out of their own pockets in the Colosseum, but they organized their own armies. And so if your army was defeated, say, like the Roman army at Teutoburg under Varus, you were basically, Varus was just out. He was not going to be a factor in Roman political existence after that terrible defeat, and a number of his supporters equally. I mean, what is interesting about, and a parallel between the Roman Empire and what we have now, is the cult of personality, especially after the assassination of Julius Caesar and the death of the Republic, and celebrity that we have now, where someone who doesn't know a fraction of what we know, the four of us,
Sean Penn,
will get millions and millions of hits and likes and support. Doesn't know shit from Shinola. That kind of celebrity. Now, at least in Rome, you had Tiberius, who was actually a fairly good administrator, but he liked little boys and little children and all. And there's a wonderful scene in the movie, in in the movie called Caligula, where Caligula is talking to Tiberius, and Tiberius is waiting in the pool where these little boys are nibbling at his penis, like minnows would nibble at, dried flesh, or those fish that eat dried flesh. And it's historically accurate. I mean, not only Suetonius talks about it, but a number of other people. And then you have Caligula himself, who basically fed off of his own upper class people. He basically robbed them blind.
The devolvement of political reality, right? Our leaders get more and more stupid. Our leaders get more and more incompetent. This is a reality that many people acknowledge, that we don't have JFK level, Charles de Gaulle level of leadership in the West.
Nowhere near.
To today compared to the 1960s, but this is of course explained by class. I mean, the oligarchic class, these rich, circles, produce dynastic kind of, not dynastic directly, but the power is in the same circles, and they devolve over time. I mean, money in politics just corrupts it, period. Money in politics makes sure that whoever has the most money is ruling, not whoever has the most qualified. So the devolvement of our political realities, it just is very easily explained by class and by money.
And we could spend hours discussing the strategies that the bourgeoisie uses to keep the working class, unaware of the reality of class and disenfranchised politically. So, Carlo brought up celebrity culture. Celebrity culture is certainly a way that they keep our minds occupied onto things that, don't matter, and into dead end kind of paradigms and ideologies that are never going to be a threat to their system. But they since they control the mass media, the education system, it's very difficult to break through to people, because they have all these advantages. So, but ultimately, if you have a person like we all were at one time, that were sincerely interested in understand what is really going on, like you said, it's logical and it's rational, and it's entirely explanatory for why things are as they are. And so people that have that genuine interest can ultimately are open to the understanding that they're not allowed by the bourgeoisie on their platforms of mass communication and in their education system, which purports to explain why things are as they are, but they have to engage in all kinds of lies. And what's this word that I was using? Inversion. So inverting reality is something that they do. So, they turn the greatest humanitarians of the 20th century, like Stalin and Mao, into the greatest mass murderers. And I mean, that is a total inversion of reality. Inversion, it means to turn something into its opposite. So, they claim that Mao, murdered 60 to 100 million people, when in reality, Mao was in charge from like 49 to 74 or 76-ish. The population doubled, life expectancy doubled, caloric intake doubled. Like, nobody in the history of the known universe has done more good for more people than Mao. And then we talk about education, destroying literacy. So literally, I don't know if anybody in all of recorded human history has done more good for more people than Mao. But in the West, he's known as a mass murderer. Like, that's the inversion. It's the total inversion of reality. And they do the same with Stalin, because these are their genuine enemies. These are their genuine class enemies that they fear, that are an actual threat to them. And so, I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And back to Ben's earlier problem of these post-socialist states. That's a word that they love to say. And I like to say, like, pre-socialist state.
I like to say, again, I've come from a future, from a more advanced society, but we have to go to a break.
Yeah, we have to go to a break. Yeah.
Okay.
We'll be back.
Undoubtedly, Africa is the best tourism destination on Earth. The continent is blessed with the most conducive atmosphere. To feel and enjoy these blessings, join the most productive one-week tour of the continent organized by Daylight Africa every September 2nd to September 9th to see beyond the fallacies about Africa on the mainstream media. Contact us at daylightafrica@gmail.com or call 718-822-5555. Daylight Africa. Revolutionizing tourism industries in Africa.
That was a quiet break. I wonder if, hopefully we haven't been muted this whole time too. That would be funny if nobody heard our entire conversation. I'm sure they did. So
I don't know where Leo is.
I just ended a rant right before the break. But yeah, Leo and Ben were gonna.
I was just about to address why socialism failed. Why socialism failed, right? In the most simple terms possible. Two children have a fight at school. The one that wins is necessarily the right one, or the one that is morally superior, or it has a better, is smarter, is better at everything. No, it means he was physically stronger at that time. It means maybe the one that lost the fight had a cold that day, that week. Maybe he had the flu. Maybe maybe he had a broken arm. Maybe these factors literally is what caused the collapse of the Soviet Union. The socialist countries were starting from a much weaker point than the colonial capitalist powers. Capitalism is based on colonialism, and colonialism is an expression of capitalism as well. The first, New Jersey and the east coast of the U.S. was industrialized with opium profits from China, and of course the profits from slavery. And England, the U.S. and the European colonial powers developed industrially much more strong and early than the socialist countries, which were either victims of colonialism or were underdeveloped. So the Soviet Union was, Russia was starting from a point that's 100 to 200 years developmentally behind the West, and it was devastated by not one but two world wars. Hundreds of cities destroyed, an entire generation of young men lost, and their enemy, the United States, never missed a beat after World War II to launch a 360 degrees full spectrum war against Russia.
Even after 1990.
Yeah, right up to 1990. And they bled the Soviet Union dry with the arms race that they initiated economically. They all the embargoes and sanctions that strangle a country's economy, the military threats, the diplomatic violence of turning surrounding countries against them, and all of these methods from a very powerful enemy eventually made the Soviet Union, collapse. Basically, obviously it's much more complicated, but that's the
illegally dissolved and looted to the bone. But yeah, you can say there were problems, especially in the slump late 80s. That's absolutely true. But it was under siege.
And the political problems of the Soviet Union and the Soviet bloc came from these economic problems as well.
Yeah,
when the economy was stagnant, the political system becomes stagnant as well and becomes overly bureaucratic and all of these problems. But anyway, yeah. So we can explain to people in these terms, whether they're ready to To hear it or not is another matter, but that is the reality, right?
They've been around for the terms, as you well put, you summarized, have been around for a long time because when you began your last statement, you reminded me of an oft quoted, from me at least, and on this program, statement from Giordano Bruno in 1584 from his Ash Wednesday Supper. And it perfectly segues the age of imperialism, around Elizabeth the First, and that gang, and what you're saying about educating people. It's not that long, but I'll read it. The helmsmen of explorations have discovered how to disturb the peace of others, to profane the guardian spirits of their countries, to mix what prudent nature has separated, to redouble men's desires by commerce, to add vices of one people to those of the other, to propagate new follies by force and set up unheard of lunacies where they did not exist before, and finally to give out the stronger as the wiser, as you put it. They have shown men new ways, new instruments, and new arts by which to tyrannize over and assassinate one another. Thanks to such deeds, a time will come when other peoples, having learned from the injuries they suffered, will know how and be able, as circumstances change, to pay back to us in similar forms our worst ones, the consequences of these pernicious inventions. And
that's really good.
And in 1584, and of course the Catholic Church burned him at the stake and then draw and quarter the dead body. But that was their style at the time. But it's really, we're here. We are 400 years later, and Billy Bob is still having to deal with idiots when he puts up perfectly cogent arguments, discussions backed up by historical context. I've seen it on his page. They're absurd.
Yeah. I wanted to add the exact same wrinkle, if I can, that Stalin, I think he said that you have to build the house with one hand while defending it with the other. It was constantly under siege, socialism, and all of their propaganda posters, everything was about peace, harmony, much like China is, and they weren't allowed to do that time after time, even though they went from 0 to 100 to a spacefaring nuclear superpower. They weren't allowed to do it. And now to the wrinkle that Carlo added, it's very true today. Except for class, people will be fighting each other about their relation to Marvel comics or DC comics, whether the Leica or the Canon camera is the best or the Nikon. They will fight about fucking cartoons, religion, skin color, culture, base ethnicity, anything but class. They have been so splintered and divided that just the word unity is almost, it's difficult to get through to people because, you know, it's, they call middle class a class or blue collar a class, like which is completely made to obscure things, you know, and it's very difficult. And in a year from now, Billy Bob, you will have to explain that Russia did not create the concentration camps, because soon they will believe that too. I'm pretty sure about that.
The indoctrination is tremendous.
Scary.
They've done a tremendous job. And, you know, I kind of liken it to an experiment, you know, an experiment in propaganda. Mass communication is relatively new. I mean, the radio has only been around for not that long. I want to say about 100 years ish, you know, that really people listen to. And then we had the TV and, you know, now we have Netflix and all that stuff, but the propaganda is so insidious, and so they're experimenting. They're experimenting in how to keep people uninformed and entertained, while they simultaneously, you know, offer us, you know, a modicum of access to opportunity, which isn't afforded those countries that have been targeted as places to exploit. You know, we're not, you know, people in Nigeria aren't given the opportunity that they are in this country. And so we know that, and we're like, hey, at least we're not Nigeria. This system isn't that bad, you know. USA, okay. The other thing I wanted to mention was, so Leo mentioned that, you know, the U.S. industrialized 200 years prior to the socialist countries, and I wanted to make the point that it wasn't a free market economy that allowed the United States to to develop and prosper and industrialize. And it took a long time, but they used protectionist policies, right? So they protected their domestic industries. And there's this idea today that's based on a fraudulent understanding of Adam Smith that free markets are how nations prosper and get wealthy. And we just need freedom. We need to abolish all government regulations and keep government out of the economy and everything. That's the panacea. That's the utopia, which will always and everywhere bring maximized prosperity and happiness to everyone. It's just nonsense. Like, it's really, really, really silly, but it's the mantra that they believe, and they've been indoctrinated to believe it. And it's very prevalent on social media. So the other issue I wanted to address was the idea that the Soviet Union collapsed. So personally, I avoid using the term collapsed. You can't call it a collapse. It wasn't a collapse out of necessity at all. It wasn't economic necessity. It wasn't a political necessity. It was somewhat of a internal coup committed by foolish people that really believed the lies the West told them. So they didn't understand class.
Like Khrushchev,
they didn't understand that the capitalists in the West had no intention of coexisting with an alternate system. That it was a lie to get them to agree to this utopian idea of coexistence, two different systems peacefully coexisting. And it was never in the cards. It was just a reason to, it was like a Trojan horse, really, that Gorbachev foolishly allowed to come right into his country. But it wasn't a collapse out of economic necessity, and it wasn't done democratically. It wasn't with the majority of the people. They never had a vote on it. When they did have a vote on, hey, what do you want to do? The vast majority said, hey, we're going to maintain the union of Soviet socialist republics. But these are discussions of a strategy of discussing reality and historic reality with people, and I think it can be problematic to use the word collapse, because then it gives them ammunition. Well, they collapse. Well, like, how good is your ideology if it just collapses? So I like to make that.
Sure. It was an internal coup, but the only way it was possible was the decades of economic warfare, the tolls that the economic warfare and in every other way, cultural warfare, information warfare, the tolls that this war had taken made the coup possible. But yeah,
absolutely.
And the opportunism and the lies of Trotsky, the opportunism of Khrushchev is where the decade for me started, as you know, leading to the Sino-Soviet split. And I watched recently Caleb Maupin. I don't know if you know him, an American Marxist-Leninist. And he had this tidbit of information to me that William Z. Foster, leader of the Communist Party USA for a while, not near the end, he was on his dying bed. And Nikita Khrushchev visited him in America on his dying bed. And he read a speech that he wrote, like he died a week later, where he defended Stalin, berated Khrushchev, and defended Mao. That's the kind of guy he was. For the bloody mistakes that Khrushchev did. And, I am guilty of using your phrase that you introduced us with, the strong men lead to good times, good times lead to weak leaders or something like that, because I hate Khrushchev so much. He inherited a great, wonderfully built society that went from zero to the top, and basically the decay started. That's the way I see it. Even though Mr. Brezhnev with the big, he tried to fix it, he was already dealt a bad hand. But I also, just one small minor point, when you use the metaphor of two kids, it's not necessarily the winner who's the better one. That's negating that socialism worked for millions and millions of people. So we can't just say it didn't work. I mean, we had a cosmonaut. A Hungarian went to space because of socialism. A lot of people.
A Hungarian went to space.
Yeah.
In the entire former Soviet bloc, a cost of rent on average was 5% of wages.
Yes.
In the entire Eastern Bloc, imagine in a society where no one stressed about paying rent. Literally no one. 5% of your wages, of your pay, went to rent on average. I mean, just imagine the social harmony. Imagine no one having to be afraid when you walk down the street. Imagine just people, the level of trust and empathy and friendships and connection that is can be developed in such societies.
Yeah, unless you're my mom. Unless you were my mum and dad, who on a subject basis got their first apartment for free. Just imagine that, because they were both students. They were teaching in growth sectors, in medicine and teaching. So therefore, this is for you. You know, imagine that today.
But going back to changing minds, hearts and minds. I'll go very personal on this.
Go.
I had a bunch of uncles in Cleveland. They're cement finishers, and we argued all the time. And I would argue with my Uncle Tony on the phone, and he would go, I hate big government. I hate wealthy people. I can't stand them. And I'd go, well, Tony, don't you and all my other uncles, don't you have tons of guns? Yes, we have tons of guns. And don't you have friends that have tons of guns? And he goes, yes, we have tons of guns. And I go, well, why don't you turn them on the wealthy people, you know, and eliminate the wealthy people? If you're going to talk this way, obviously you hate rich people. You tell me every time I talk to you how much you hate, and so do your 5 brothers. That's all I hear from you guys, drinking beer and talking about how much you hate wealthy people. Then I take my wife out, my second wife, Rosalie, out to Ohio to a reunion. We're at the reunion. My cousin Leo says, this reunion is boring. Why don't we go out and beat up some N-words? You know, right in front of my wife. She was totally shocked. We go to visit my Uncle Johnny. He's got these boulders in the front yard. He goes, you know what these boulders are for in the front yard? Well, I knew what he was going to say. It's for when the N-words come out of Cleveland, I can hide behind these boulders and shoot them. And then we weren't there 10 minutes when the local sheriff showed up, who's a friend of my uncle's. Now, I know my uncle called the sheriff to say, my lefty nephew is here. Come on over and scare him. So he comes over. He's got his gun on his hip. We sit down. About 3 minutes into the conversation, he goes, are you a communist? You know, it was like evident. So I'm going, on the one hand, you hate the rich, and you've got all these guns. I say you have 300 million guns. You go, we have more. And you hate the rich. Why don't you kill the rich? Now, I hope I don't get demonetized for that, because I'm just asking him a question. Oh, you know, because he's all bluster. But how do you deal with that level of stupid? That's the level I've had to deal with all my fucking life, in every mode, with this fucking Italian communities that I've been involved in Springfield and here. And my bookstore was in Upper Northwest Washington, in Bethesda, where the mean income is over $300,000. And they're all stooges for the American government. They're all the fucking stooges. Right, left, center. I don't give a shit what you say. Some of the people were nice, you know, Julian Bond. I love Julian Bond. And some of our other customers. Christopher Hitchens was okay until he lost his mind. But
I agree there.
But I'll concede, Carlo, that it's an uphill battle.
Tell me about it. So what?
But has he interacted with the black community at all, with black people? Because that is obviously, for me, travel was a big eye opener. Interacting with other people, being a minority in another country.
Oh, my uncle.
It's the cure. Like, but talking with those people.
My same uncle. See, this is the irony. He said, I'm not a racist. He goes, I go to the track with my friend, whatever his name is.
I have black friends.
And he's black. But we're driving down. He's visiting D.C., and we're driving down through just any neighborhood in D.C. I mean, it's we have black people everywhere. And he's going, oh, man, I couldn't live in D.C. There's too many black people. Well, you live in Cleveland. There's, you know, fair percentage of black people in Cleveland, you moron. But it's just this problem, you know, that they're self-contradictory to the point of where they're basically insane people. They're crazy. They're pathological idiots. It's a whole.
Well, I think the USA is a great example of when you take away class consciousness, right? When people don't understand why they're angry, because the source of their anger is the rich, is how they are oppressed, how they work so hard and they're not getting rich, right? So the source of their grievance is class antagonism. But when that's taken out of the equation, when that's taken out of the discourse, out of common, just consciousness, people, all of this grievance has to go somewhere, and it goes to race, it goes to these conflicts of religion,
all of these
religious conflict. So all of these other conflicts are super animated, between atheism and religion, between white and black, between men and women. These become super charged and super passionate because class is taken out of the equation.
How do you overcome that, though?
Reintroduction of class. Reintroduction, like sit people down, and people are not willing to understand because they're still comfortable, because they're still. I mean, the people who really don't want to understand, because the labor aristocracy, I mean, the war and violence has been taken out of the imperial core after slavery, superficially ended, and placed into the imperial periphery, into the Congo, where 6 million people died between 2000 and 2008 from the wars over the mines.
Yeah, and that's
so the violence.
Belgian Congo. Yeah, that's modern Congo. Yeah,
that's modern Congo. That's after the collapse of the Soviet Union. That's the year 2000 to 2008. Yeah. So the violence from the imperial core is exported along with the pollution and the waste to the poor countries, all of the violence and conflict. And so people in the imperial core are still, living okay, or, but as their situation devolves, as the contradictions become more and more sharp, people will have to think seriously. They will have to think soberly, and no longer can they just act like a child and indulge all of these fantasies, and they have to sit down and really think what's happening to my people, to me, to my family, to my country.
And not alone, not isolated in front of a screen. I know we are speaking on a screen. I understand the irony, but I know I have limited time. Just a quick anecdote from my life. We have a similar problem to the black and white problem in the US with the Roma, the gypsy community in Hungary. And it always helps to have one of my friends who is a Roma person and a magician and a great guy there with me, like live example. And then they sort of second guess their preconceived notions of how bad the other is. So you have to, black and white unite and fight, or people within the same profession or different, you talk with people together. I think that would be important. Just so they see their common enemy.
And minorities in this country, in fact, especially African Americans, are the wisest people in the whole culture, because they have to be, otherwise they die, and they do die anyway. But they are very, very, very savvy people. They've generally thought through things far more than the average white person in this country. I want to add that. And as far as the Congo goes, for our listeners, Keith Harmon Snow did excellent reporting when he was in the game on the Congo. And anytime you see a piece by Keith Harmon Snow, you can read it and trust it. Amy Goodwin would never have him on her show. So that's a proof of his validity.
I think the U.S. will be the last society to, we're going to be dragging humanity back, kicking and screaming, for generations to come, and for this indoctrination to be undone. But I don't think it's as bad in, the global South. I think they don't have this lack of class consciousness in the global South. I think, and that's a good thing, because, as the rest of humanity wakes up, and the U.S. doesn't, I mean, that's okay, because not everybody is doing as poorly as the U.S. as far as their indoctrination goes. But yeah, there's apathy, because again, we have a level of comfortability, and that's not to say people are doing well in this country, but they can always look abroad and say, hey, at least we're not Nigeria. and that placates them, and they don't have any interest in really getting to the bottom. And that's not always going to be there, because as if they're pushing this whole World War III, this multipolarism and the resistance to multipolarism, the economic situation can get a lot worse in this country, and then people aren't going to have the luxury of apathy. But I don't know. Do we want to discuss Georgia? I mean, there's some interesting things in Georgia. We don't have a lot of time left.
Yeah, I just want to say one brief thing about South America. I think South America is very, very class conscious. And the major dividing line is between the people who consider themselves natives to South America and people who consider themselves conquistadors. And you have this new coup in Peru, and the lines are very clear. You had a coup in Bolivia, and it was overcome by the indigenous people, and they retain their control of power there. There are gradations of color in the Caribbean, from light to dark. New Orleans in the United States used to be that way. There's 24 different mulatto colorations in Louisiana, and some of that still exists. So I think there is that kind of class consciousness based on skin color and indigenous populations, who was here and who was a conquistador, who was a colonizer. But yeah, let's talk Georgia. Go ahead, guys.
Where we have 4 minutes.
Color revolution. Yeah. They have to consolidate. They have to make the anti-Russian countries even more rabidly anti-Russia. They have to consolidate an alliance of some kind because they are losing in every regard.
If you want to know who's behind it, check the Twitter. I always check the Twitter of people like USAID, who posted a video about this already. Like, that's the first place I saw it, with the EU flag, with the Georgian flag, and with the Ukrainian flag. So that was perfectly obvious to me what it's all about.
So the US installed their puppet Saakashvili. I don't think I'm saying his name correctly.
Saakashvili. Yeah.
And that's when he was prompted to start shelling South Ossetia, the breakaway province of Georgia, because he wanted to say, "Hey, it's part of Georgia." So he started shelling the Russian separatists in South Ossetia. Russia then protected the Russians in South Ossetia, and there's a great picture of Saakashvili eating his tie. He's literally got his tie in his mouth, sitting in his presidential office, worried that the tanks aren't going to stop, and that they're going to, roll all the way to Tbilisi, if that's how you say the capital of Georgia. And
I have to find that picture.
After him, he became a pariah. He was a crook. He moved over to Ukraine. He's a grifter. He's a Western agent, and he's just been grifting, as an agent of the West for decades. But they hate him in Georgia now. They kicked him out. There's probably a warrant for his arrest, I think. But the government that came after him wasn't nearly as pro-West, and they understand the necessity of maintaining decent relationship with Russia. So what you have now is that government is not acceptable to the West. The West needs another rabid anti-Russian government. And so they're doing this color revolution in the Capitol, saying, hey, we don't like your law that outlaws these foreign agents coming in and making us more anti-Russian. Essentially. So you need to, we're gonna try and overthrow you, another Western-sponsored color revolution, and put in a government that is totally pro-U.S. and totally rabidly anti-Russia. So that's what's afoot right now, and I think that's a good sign, because it means that the government in Georgia is refusing to toe the Western line, and they're demanding that, hey, we need to have decent relationships with Russia. And that's all Russia wants. They just don't want a freaking, a Western enemy that NATO is going to put nukes in to threaten them. That's all Russia wants. So it's good that, and I think it's going to fail, right? I think everybody's up to speed on these Western color revolutions, and they're not falling for them anymore. And I think that's obvious what's going on here.
And supposedly these demonstrations are involved with something called the Foreign Agent Act,
I wanted to bring that in here.
Yeah, something that the United States has had since 1938, that had their own FARA Act, And the other thing is, it's curious that now Bakhmut's days away from falling, and now we have this agitation in a country that also borders Russia to the south.
Yeah, in the Caucasus, but far away from Europe, but it considers itself European. I mean, the Black Sea is in between Europe and Georgia. Also, the birthplace of Stalin is in Gori, Georgia. Significant, I think. But yeah, this was just, if anybody has like NGOs, schools, that sort of stuff, above 20% or above funding from a foreign power, then they have to admit it and register as a foreign agent. That's all it was.
That's all it was.
I love that the protests are about Western values of transparency and all that. And it is about defeating transparency. It absolutely is.
So we should change, by the way, NGO to VGO, very government-funded organizations.
Yes.
Exactly.
And on that somber note,
that's a good.
We will close for today. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being back here.
Big up. Big up. Big up.